it be infrastructure issues or affordability issues. There are a myriad of different reasons to why folks are being left on the wrong side of the digital divide, but human IT is here to help alleviate that problem.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
And we have about 100 employees. 50 of them work in a warehouse and 50 of them are actually working remotely. So it's about exactly split.
Yeah, interesting kind of hybrid between physical work and remote work that we'll get to. But I want to dive right into the conversation. Hold on a second here. Some technical difficulties. Uh-oh. Can you guys see me? Yep. Okay. Small internet connection problem. You guys can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I just want to start here with kind of contextualizing really how big of a shift we are seeing in remote work. So this blurb is from a working paper at MIT that was published in April of this year. It was an online, simple one-question survey of about 25,000 people. That was a representative sample of the working population in the United States. And they found that of the people that were working before coronavirus and the public health orders were mandated, half of these people were working from home, including about 30% of people who were originally in an office and now are working remotely. So we're seeing about half of the pre-employed workforce in the United States is working from home, which is an absolute massive shift, because before that only 15% of people were working remotely. And so is a huge paradigm shift with ramifications into everything from real estate to architecture and design, HR, liability. It's really a full domino effect, but I really kind of wanted to contextualize what a massive shift we have seen over the course of 3 months. So migration to remote work, it's always been something that we've been talking about as a as an economy, that this would be happening down the line, a years-long process of people eventually moving. But now it's taken place in a matter of months. So I'll start here. Like, how sustainable do you think these current remote work practices are? Like, from Zoom, from just an organizational standpoint, what do you think about the longevity of how we're currently working?
Well, should I start, Mo?
Yeah, Alan, good. Have it.
Well, we've always worked remote in the world of architecture. We've always had people working at home. We've used Zoom. We remotely log into our servers, so we're used to it. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing it for the last 3 months. And at first, it seemed as though our communication was better and our communications were more direct, because they were scheduled Zoom meetings, and we were more focused. But as time has gone on, we found out that we haven't been as efficient. Mm. And we realize that we do have to get together occasionally. So I believe, the workplace is going to change. I don't think the current method of working remotely, where people never meet, is sustainable. We have to find some sort of balance between working remotely or working at home and also meeting together in the same place. Mm. So that's what we're looking to do, and I think that's what we're looking to have our clients look at as well. Is people are not going to work at home remotely forever. They need to meet, or at least in my industry, we need to meet. We need to get together and look at the same materials. We need to look at the same models. We need to collaborate and be creative about our architecture and design business. So we have to get together at least a couple of times a week. Hmm.
Chris, if there's anything you wanted to add.
Well, I think, thank you. I think there's two sides of it. I think humans adapt quickly. So I know for myself, I do not miss commuting. I do not miss the traffic and road rage and all of that. And traffic accidents are one of those leading causes of, injuries and deaths for workers. So it's definitely something that we could address in some ways. But I also think humans are very social animals. So I think Alan's exactly right. I think we need that in-person collaboration. So I could see sort of the flex happening, where people that can use digital technology will do that for a portion of their meetings and classes, probably going forward, possibly forever. right? So that some percent will always keep doing that. But I think some people will want to get back in there and have that social interaction, especially for industries that you need to have that in-person activity.
Yeah, those creative jobs. Gabe, if there's anything in terms of your experience managing, 50 employees that are now remote, have you noticed any lapses in a worker productivity or any kind of, roadblocks, or are things kind of going pretty smoothly?
Yeah, great question. And my video is disabled for some reason, so apologies for that. I've been there we go. There we go, I'm back. I keep thinking about, the current climate and what we're going through with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think about what would happen, what would this be like if it was 10 years in the past, right? And kind of how lucky we are to have the current internet infrastructure that we have as a country, how lucky we are to have the cloud infrastructure that we have, right? Thanks to our tech companies. And doing remote work in 2020 is completely different than working remotely in, say, 2010 even. So we have the systems, right? We have the infrastructure to work effectively and efficiently with each other, even though we may not be in the same spot. But the problem is access, right? Which is kind of what human IT is here for, is to make sure that everyone has equal access. So that way, they're connected to that infrastructure, whether it be internet, or they understand, what platforms they need to be privy to and comfortable with in order to work in an environment such as the current one that we're in now. Not everyone is as comfortable technologically as the next person. And so I think that's the challenge, for a lot of folks who are struggling, working remotely, is not everyone's in home environment is the same. Right? And then we see that, within our own employees, right, which is only about 50 who are working remotely. Some folks have folks have kids, some do not. Some have that really good broadband connection, and some is not. Others are not as great. And I think that's what the office environment always provided, was just that consistent work environment. So what you're going to get when you get into an office. When you look at them, what are you going to get environmentally? You limit the distractions in an office. Sometimes you get to have that creative collaboration that is so important to so many companies, depending on what industry you're in and what kind of culture you have, of course. But I think, is it sustainable, working remotely? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I think it is. The best answer is going to lie in the middle here, and it's going to be about flexibility and adaptability.
Yeah. So it seems like, a lot of these trends we're going to kind of accelerated, but in terms of the kind of stepping back to in retrospect to see what things we still need or that we're missing, we're kind of just now coming around to realizing, that some things need to be addressed. So that kind of leads me into the next question. And you guys have talked about this with, the psychology of how humans collaborate, the nature of a lot of creative office work. But we've seen that working remotely has resulted kind of in a paradox, increased formal communication. So many of you we have Zoom meetings daily, weekly, a lot of these high touch formal communications. But what we lose a lot is casual interactions. And these are just, random asides to your coworkers, water cooler conversations, which are important both from a social aspect, but I think a lot of times too, they will bring up some kind of innovation or spontaneous collaboration that you didn't think of before. And it's just kind of the social nature of working that promotes these. So how do you balance that? How do you, the efficiency and safety of working from home is evident, but how do you balance the need for these kind of low touch casual communication? So this could be design standpoint, psychology, and then also just managing people.
Well, it's a very difficult thing to do. As we're working remotely, you can't really have casual interactions because, if I want to talk to one of my colleagues, they may not be sitting at their computer. I can do a Teams call, but they may not be there, right? And very often they're not there, or they're doing something else, or they're doing something with their children, or they're petting their dog, or they're doing something else. And and they're just not there. So it doesn't really work. The casual interactions for us, anyway, doesn't work remotely. So that's why we need to get back to the office and, have a water cooler conversation 6 feet apart. Have these casual interactions, but, doing it with social distancing.
Yeah, if I want to jump in and if we want our order to be alphabetical for whatever reason, I think, again, and of course as psychologists, we'll always see both sides of this, play the fence a little bit. But I think immediately of the students that I write letters of rec for, I cannot get to know students interpersonally at that level. So I worry a little bit about the promotion of future students, employees, that sort of thing, and the sort of maintaining of existing structures that exist, if you will. So people that already have contacts or networks that already exist will be maintained probably, but new people will not be brought into those networks. So I think it's more important now than ever for mentoring and things like that, that we really haven't even started addressing in most cases, to continue those informal development opportunities, whether it's for students, young employees, individuals who are non-traditional to that corporate environment. All of those networks still need to keep building, and it's hard to build when you don't have those small interpersonal interactions that really grease those wheels. That being said, I also want to say the water cooler conversations are those that often get people in trouble. So that's, I think, where HR also is going to be playing an interesting role, is where are those water cooler conversations happening now? Is that under the purview of work? Yada, yada.
Yeah.
Well, it's also very interesting that for the last 5 years, we've been designing workplaces to encourage casual interactions. We've been designing workplaces with large vistas so you can see your colleague across the room and go over it and have a conversation with them. And now we won't be able to do that because we want to discourage casual interactions.
That's a great point. We invested so much money in creating physical spaces on campus for students and employees to hang out. And I'm sure a lot of other places did, with the umbrellas, with the solar chargers for the laptops and all that. And I think people are going to want to get back to their spaces. It's just going to have to be mindful of how you do it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I echo what Chris and Alan are talking about, and agree with everything. For us at Human IT, creative collaboration is built into our guiding values. It's how we innovate, and we pride ourselves on creative collaboration, something we talk about every single day. And it has been challenging for us, since we've gone remote. And we've done some experimentation to where we've had what we called open rooms, where anyone could pop in at any time. That didn't work out too great, just because how busy we were, because the pandemic has really put a spotlight on digital equity work. And so we're just all hands on deck. So we may try that again now that things have slowed down a little bit and we're kind of coming to a new normal, so to speak. But what we've had to do is we've had to create meetings or, situations to where maybe even after work, we have happy hour time, to where there's no agenda. We're not going to talk about maybe some of the, X, Y, or Z. It's just going to be a free flowing conversation to where we have maybe just a moderator, making sure that, people are conversing. So we're trying that out and seeing how that goes. But the problem with that is that even in of itself is intentional, right? We're all meeting to do this, versus at the office, sometimes it's completely random, and you're going to have those random conversations that you just can't do remotely. And that is the challenge. And so, I believe that another way companies can be creative too is just evaluate how you meet in general, because how your company meets says a lot about your company culture. And so, maybe instead of meeting, huddling like you do traditionally every day, maybe change how you huddle. And maybe you have like micro huddles to where you're able to have more breakout sessions, to where you can have those random conversations where you're specifically trying to innovate using that creative lens that's so important to us. And just changing up how you meet in general can help with that collaborative effect and help with innovation as a whole. So, I don't have any answers. We just have a lot of questions over here, and where we're experimenting. That's all I can say.
That seems
I
to be
could
the
jump in
theme.
one more time and just echo what Gabe just said. I think that idea that meetings echo culture is critical to remember. I could see art troops, for example, meeting with digital Zoom dance parties for the first 15 minutes of their meeting or something, or ending with that. And I think we need to be as creative as we are with our different industries, how we bring people to those meetings and how we echo our culture within that meeting.
Yeah, and it's hard to plan something that's organic like that. You know, the planned fun has its limits in trying to force something spontaneous to happen. So yeah, that's a really good point, and kind of blurring the lines between when you're working and when you're not working. You kind of end up working all the time, and it's yeah, it's interesting to see how that'll come about, and that kind of again leads to this next question I have. So a lot of standard office practices, you know, like highly produced meetings or travel for small in-person conversations, things like this have kind of been recontextualized, and you've realized that a lot of things are either they're excessive, they're inefficient, they weren't filling a gap, and so you guys were kind of alluding to this, but what does physical office space bring to the table? You know, how can physical office space necessitate play a role in having these casual interactions or keeping a cohesive workplace going forward? So Alan, I kind of want to hear from you first on this one, especially since you're involved in the direct design, physical design of these future office spaces. Is he there? Alan, are you with us? He might be. Okay, I'll come back to him. Dr. Warren, Chris, if you have any comments on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think office spaces in general, like we were saying, were kind of designed to increase interpersonal sort of, hanging out, if you will, and it's sort of pushing back the other way. I again will say again that I think people will adapt back quickly, and they'll want to be social again because we're social animals. So those spaces will get used again very quickly, I think. The ironic thing is individuals will probably need them less. So the temptation would be to share them, but sharing spaces now seems counterintuitive. So I almost see those spaces again getting more private. Like my lab that I use at work when I do research and stuff like that, I could see that circle of research assistants getting more close-knit, and those rooms being more personally occupied. And that's why I feel like the integration of people is even more important now than before, how we get people into spaces that they weren't traditionally represented in, if these physical interactive spaces are not there. But yeah, let's hear from Alan too.
Yeah, I think he's...
I was thrown off, but I just got back in.
Okay, yeah.
As I was saying, large companies, they're sending half of their workforce home, but they're providing space for them to come back into the office on an as-needed basis. So we're designing for 50% of their workforce in permanent places, and another third of that 50% that's staying home to be in what we call jump seats or hoteling stations. And then we're also providing a lot of collaboration rooms or team rooms so that when these people do come back to the office to work with their team, they have a place to work. So we're saying it's not a complete reduction, but it's probably a 30% reduction in the need for office space with this new paradigm that we're looking at.
And those are office spaces, it seems like it's going back to what we were saying before, specifically for necessitating that, those interactions that you miss doing remote work.
Yes, and of course, employers are realizing that people don't want to fight traffic. They don't want to get in their cars, and we don't want, as an employer, we don't want them to get in their cars and fight traffic every day because, an employee who's spent an hour and a half in their car trying to get to work is not going to be as productive. They're much more productive, staying at home. And as one of my female employees said to me, she said, I want to work from home. I got to get up, I got to put on makeup, I got to get in my car, I got to drive. it takes me an hour and a half longer to get to work than it does now, where I just wake up and I turn on the computer. I did ask her for an extra hour and a half of work, but she didn't give it.
Maybe, yeah.
Everyone's personal needs are different. Every company needs is different, or depending on what industry you're in, again, what culture that you're in, it's not a one size fits all situation. At Human IT, the approach that we're taking is flexibility is stability, right? You have to be flexible to kind of meet both demands, so to speak. For the folks who don't want to spend their time in the car, as Alan was alluding to, versus the ones who just need that consistent work environment because they don't get it at home. Those are the folks who do want to come into the office and don't mind the commute. They like the commute because it switches their psychology of, I'm at home, now I'm at work, right? Sometimes, as we probably all have had that experience, during the last couple months, is we'll close our laptops and we turn around and there's our living room, right? You're just right in the same space where you left off, basically. And so you have to, I think you just have to be ready to be flexible if you're an organization, you're leading a company. And so at Human IT, what we've actually done is we're actually taking our warehouse that we're in right now, and we planned on actually getting a larger space, but with this whole situation, with the coronavirus, we're actually going to do that. We're going to speed up that process, and now we're looking to get into a larger space sooner than later, so that way we can really make sure that folks are social distancing who need to be in the warehouse, and that way when our office folks want to come into an office, there's going to be ample space for them to do so, to where they have their private setting. But at the same time, we also have enough space to create that collaborative setting as well. But maybe instead of 12 people in a conference room, we're only going to be able to have 6. So I think the best answer, again, is in the middle. We need to be flexible. You need to be able to provide both, depending on who the person is and what your requirements are as a company. What do you require from a collaborative standpoint? So that's our approach.
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Warren.
No, I was just going to say, I liked what Gabe said about my partner always says that about driving home from doing therapy. She's a therapist. And so that drive is hugely protective of probably our relationship in many ways, that she can change her psychology or let the sort of therapy that she just did wash away on that 10-minute drive even. But along with that is also the privacy concerns for anyone in occupations or businesses that are talking about sensitive information, whether it's banking, psychology, whatever. Home environments not necessarily secure. So office spaces also provide security in terms of FERPA or HIPAA sort of compliance issues. I go for jogs if she has to work from home, because not only will it give me nightmares, but it's not HIPAA compliant at all for me to be in the next room potentially. So that security of information, I think, is important to consider.
Yeah, that physical space, that idea really resonates with me as well. It just is, the work-life balance is, it's not just a mental state, but it is defined in that physical switch. And so, really interesting to see that, physical office spaces, it's moving towards that hybrid where it's just one component of work rather than housing all of what goes on in an organization.
I want to add something we're seeing in our industry, and I think it's actually occurring in our office as well, is a lot of the younger architects and younger designers, they're working at home and they're working too much. They're burning themselves out, and we can't monitor how much they're working because we don't really know. So we're finding out that people are working 12, 16 hours a day. They're not telling us, and we don't want them to work that hard, and they're just burning themselves out. A lot of them are doing it because they're afraid they might lose their job during this employment crisis. But that's sort of an offshoot of what's happening when people work at home. So you don't monitor, you can't see how much they're working, and they may be really messing up their work-life balance.
Kind of to compensate for, that losing that physical interaction. That makes sense. People would try to prove their worth almost again to ensure that they'll still remain employed. That's a really good point. Yeah, so that, this question, how will the modern office change? We don't have any concrete answers, but you guys touched on that with physical layout. Alan, having people do the work that they can do on their own remotely, and then if there's a need for reduced real estate and physical office space, having those spaces specifically be for things you can't get at home. So collaboration or that low touch interaction. Facility features, specifically, Alan, if there's anything that is becoming kind of an industry standard. I know at our office, we extended the cubicle height. We have air filters, hand sanitizer stations, getting a temperature check before you go in. Is there anything else that is emerging as a standard practice for the future office space?
Yes, there is. I mean, there is the triage issue, which you mentioned, taking temperature and being observant of people who might be ill. We're also seeing circulation patterns within offices become one way. So people don't have to pass each other in the corridors. So we're seeing one-way circulation patterns. We're seeing large rooms, break rooms, conference rooms, want to have 2 doors so that people can come in and come out. We're seeing break rooms either being scheduled. You can't just go and get yourself a coffee anymore. You have to sort of be scheduled to get yourself a cup of coffee. Or we're also encouraging our clients to hire day porters who would wear PPE, and day porters would actually bring beverages and food to individuals at their desks, so they don't have to get up and go to the break room. We're also encouraging them to have day porters in the restrooms so that the restrooms can be cleaned on a constant basis. And the day porters would also monitor the workrooms, and not the workrooms, but the break rooms, and clean the break rooms on a regular basis. And there's no more desking. No more of this desking where people are sitting 4 feet apart.
Is that can you explain desking briefly?
Desking it's something that you would see at WeWork, where people, you have a laptop and you have 4 feet of desk space, and then there's somebody right next to you, and then there's somebody opposite you. That's not happening anymore.
Almost like a classroom.
Almost like a classroom.
Okay.
And workspaces are getting larger. I think it was Gabe that mentioned that a conference room that could seat 15 is only going to accommodate 7. So things are going to change. Things are going to be spread out. And I don't think the verdict is in as to whether there's going to be less real estate need. The real estate will be less efficient because it will be servicing less people. It may have to be larger to accommodate social distancing and the additional team rooms and the additional hoteling stations and all the other things that need to be added in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, kind of counterintuitive to what I would have assumed most people would need.
Yeah, I agree. I think the larger settings and the closer settings will end up sort of, I think, being rescheduled, or people will rethink that. I'm an academic senator, and that's a room with, mostly people my age or older. I'm a younger senator, believe it or not, with all my gray hair. And so there's a lot of people older than me, all really packed into a lecture hall, basically, where students are there before us. I don't see a lot of people wanting to really jam in there anymore now that we've got accustomed to virtual Senate meetings. Once I think that is managed, I think it's okay. I also want to throw in the idea of technology, sort of the needs or facility features is now going beyond the walls of traditional organizations. And I think some, say businesses within Long Beach might want to argue for citywide Wi-Fi like New Orleans has, or things like that. Or building those infrastructures. There's probably plans on the tables that I don't know about, but those larger infrastructures I think need to be collaborations more than ever. The university, for example, is piggybacking with AT&T and other broadband services to get students Wi-Fi if they're in Irvine or Placentia or wherever. They can't necessarily rely on the Wi-Fi capability of campus.
I see. And kind of speaking to your expertise, do you think the psychology of work, both in terms of how people view a career, or balancing, maybe personal interests that maybe they have more freedom to do now with remote work. Do you anticipate that changing, especially, I guess, as you teach students who are moving into the working world? Do you anticipate any transitions there, any big paradigm changes?
Honestly, I think most people, and I wasn't sure where I'd fit this in, so I'll just say it now. I think most people don't care about showing up to work sick. I think this is helping to adjust that mindset. But in the research, there's like 99% of the research is getting people to work with, injuries. Very little research focuses on getting people to stay home. And most people will, and the better workers, the highly conscientious workers, the more, astute workers will want to show up. So they're going to find ways to get to work. I think the more nuanced interactions, I think, is what's more dangerous in terms of promoting people that you haven't really interacted with in realistic settings. Like I said, letters of rec, things like that. But I think people will adjust and, get back to sort of the regular modality quicker than we expect. Because SARS was around, right? I'm trying to get a paper published that I did about SARS a few years ago. Nobody remembers that. Nobody remembers MRSA. So hopefully this will get a little bit more under control and people can return a little bit. But hopefully it adjusts our mindset that if we are sick, we should stay home. So I hope that's one of those paradigm shifts, is that we're a little bit more pro-social in that sense. I know that's not exactly addressing your question, though.
No, that makes sense. Gabe, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would like to add in relation to, in regards to this question, is I think the good companies and great companies are just reevaluating their protocols and procedures from an HR perspective, first and foremost. And that's happening, as we speak. And we're really just trying to figure this out. I think great companies always had an office space that was human-centric, right? You want to make sure that, the employees are comfortable and happy, because that's when you're going to get great work done. But what does that mean now, right? What does human-centric mean today, in June compared to last November, right? That's being redefined as we speak. So it's really kind of put a lot of HR departments behind an 8 ball to kind of make sure that the protocols and procedures are meeting the new human-centric needs that exist, during the coronavirus era. So I think time will tell with how the office is going to look for in the short term, medium, and then long term. And how your protocols and procedures are going to have to adapt to that new normal.
I think more importantly than the changing design of the office is the changing attitudes and the changing habits of workers. They're going to have to pay attention to the new protocols. We're helping our clients develop new employee manuals on how to use the space. It's basically an owner's manual, how to use your new office, which direction to walk, how to stay socially distant. And, people, it's very difficult for people to break their habits. I'm sure Chris will attest to this. If you're used to getting up and walking over to the water cooler without a mask on, you're probably going to do it until you're told 4 or 5 times that you can't do it. But I think that's more important, is getting the employees to really adhere to the new protocols that are in place.
And I think it's important to mention too, real quickly, that sick leave and all of that, I think, is part of this whole umbrella, right? There's, thousands of days or something in California alone of sick days that aren't used when probably they should have been. So I think focusing again on the infrastructure of how do we protect workers, from each other and from the sort of policies that try to enforce them to be there when they should probably be staying home.
And just kind of to add on to that, I believe Governor Newsom made COVID-19 a presumption for workers' comp recently, which kind of means that if you have an employee that goes to work and then they contract coronavirus, it's presumed that they got that at the workplace, and so the employer is responsible for helping with workers' comp. And so that kind of gets into the liability legal aspect of returning to the workplace. And as Alan said, you know, people that don't necessarily, they're not used to these new rules. It's going to take some time and obviously will take some significant costs, financial and, you know, physical costs to accommodate having porters or possibly having to spend more money on HR and workers' comp. These are all questions that are unraveling currently. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see how different sectors and different industries respond to them. And that kind of gets to this question: how do you accommodate employees with varying degrees of perceived risk? In our last webinar covering economic outlook, Scott Flexo, marketing professor at Cal State, mentioned that this was one of the key areas, perceived risk, one of the key areas in getting people to re-enter retail and other places was accommodating the fact that there are basically three subsets of people: the early adopters who will, you know, have minimal perceived risk and immediately go back into the workplace, immediately go back to shopping, all those things. There's that middle group that's a little more hesitant, kind of requires a little more information before they dive in. And then there's that last group, the highest perceived risk, who they're, you know, immunocompromised, they have some other issue where they are going to be the latest adopters going back. And you get a mix wherever you go. In a workplace especially, not everyone's going to be going back at the same time. So how do you accommodate this, you know, this varying degree of risk for employees?
Well, I'll give most of my time to Chris, but as an employer, I would say all we can do is do whatever we can to create a safe workplace. Take all of the data and information that we know and create the safest workplace we can. And, you know, and try to let our employees know that we've done absolutely everything we can to create a safe workplace. Other than that, I don't know what we can do. And that's why I would give the rest of my time to Chris. So.
I appreciate that. I think that was a great answer, though. I think accommodations, right, in terms of letting people work from home if they can modify their jobs to be able to do that for home. We did that for our administrative people and all sorts of classifications on campus, of course, as everybody else had to. But moving forward, let's say individuals with families, children at home that need to stay home, there's possibilities for leave, you know, paid and unpaid leave situations. So I think that's huge for employers to consider how they can, you know, modify even people's normal salary to give them more time at home. That's more of an unpaid leave, but also, instituting those paid and virtual options, especially for the older workers. I think also we talked about when people come to campus, and I think one thing that's sort of an accommodation, but also just sort of an important aspect is tracking who's there. So I think Alan mentioned like having an appointment to get a coffee. I think, you know, maybe it won't go that far, but I have to check in if I want to go to my office now, which is I would go there at 10 p.m. sometimes to pick up papers I needed to grade or, you know, a research article. There's a big change of the psychology there that I have to check in to go. And I won't say that I've been to campus, but I definitely haven't checked in yet. Again, people are hard to switch those habits, but that's for tracking. So if somebody does come down positive, we have to be able to track people. So I think there'll be more of that check-in, which is sort of a protective device and hopefully options for people to work from home in terms of accommodations.
Yeah, and I would agree with all of that. And I think I was alluding to this a second ago, where you just have to be flexible. You have to be accommodating to everyone's needs, and everyone's needs are different. So for the employee who wants to stay at home, you know, for whatever reason that is, you just, you know, you have to be accommodating to that and sensitive to those reasons first and foremost. And then at Human IT, we offer a stipend to where if you need to work at home, what type of equipment do you need in order to be effective and efficient, right? Because at the office, all the desks are the same, everything is the same in uniform, while people's apartments or homes, you know, have, you know, different square footages and not everyone has their own private office. So they may need to create a setup in their living room, and they need a different size desk with a different size monitor. So we say, okay, well, describe what you need. You have a $1,000 budget to be able to purchase maybe a new table or a new desk or a new chair, whatever have you, to make sure that they're comfortable and able to work effectively and efficiently. And then it's with the current infrastructure, as I alluded to in the beginning of this discussion, is we have the cloud infrastructure to be able to work and communicate effectively, even though we're not in the same room. Every platform that we use at Human IT is in the cloud. So every update, every letter that is typed is instantly there, right? It's not kind of that file, save, send model that was happening 10 years ago. And so you can see what's happening in real time. So it's easy to create accountability tools. So it's, in my opinion, not that big a deal and not that difficult if you're paying attention and you're diligent to make sure that you're accommodating every single employee, whether they need to work from home full time, part-time, or, you have that employee who wants to work in the office full-time.
I think, the role, as you were saying, the cloud infrastructure, living in an information age, makes a huge difference. And again, in our conversations in the previous weeks, a thing that was brought up, that one of the key barriers for people entering the workplace again, or you just kind of getting back to whatever normal is availability of information. And so having both, information available and like a physical evidence that your employer, your office building is taking steps to ensure that risk is minimized. I think that is a huge, plays a huge part in kind of the psychology of the worker. So the fact that our building here has hand sanitizing stations everywhere, they have the elevators marked out for spaces, there's signage everywhere, that kind of, the more information that people receive, I feel like it could correlate to just having a better idea of how much risk is actually involved, or the fact that people are minimizing, taking steps to minimize exposure. I think that's a really, really big, important piece to all of this. This kind of was alluded to, and I think that it hasn't been talked about as much as it really should be, especially now that we're in the summer, but childcare and reopening schools play a huge role in returning to the office or the productivity of working remotely. And so I wanted to get your guys' input on this part. What role does childcare play, and the ability to have schools reopen for your workers, the psychology behind it in terms of going back to work and then also working remotely?
Well, it plays a very big role for those employees that do have young children. And we do have one employee with 2 toddlers at home, and it's extremely challenging. She can't come back to work because she has to take care of her children. Now, unfortunately, it tends to be the mothers who sort of bear the responsibility for childcare. And I think, that the family should really discuss it, and it should be shared. I mean, it may be that the father has to go to work, or he has a job that he can't do from home, but it seems to overburden the moms. And in our case, we're just, we're allowing her to work from home for as long as she has to, and until the kids can get back into some sort of daycare or school situation.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I think Gabe and Alan both said it best, that flexibility, I think, is especially key here. Creating options if there weren't options to work from home, including those sort of family needs, especially in this time when things are closing down, like schools. Schools are one of the first to open up because parents, I think, are too burdened right now, too taxed. They're doing multiple jobs, and that just, you talked about work-life balance. There's zero work-life balance for a lot of parents right now, and that can create burnout and all sorts of negative work outcomes. So employers should definitely care about it.
Yeah, some people may be more productive at home, but I feel like for a lot of times, a lot of people are less productive, as you said. They have to balance time if they're two parents or if they're a single parent. It's really hard to balance that, and for people to understand that. Gabe, yeah, if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, I don't have anything new. It's just, again, being flexible. That's the common thread here, and being ready to accommodate the moms and dads who have to work from home because school is out and there's no childcare facilities open. And so I think what Alan said, we're saying the same thing. We'd work from home as long as you need to until schools open up again, or you can get some help maybe from grandma, but not everyone lives next to grandma or grandpa all the time, right? So we have a lot of employees who have young children at home, and we're hearing from our employees, and some saying it's not a problem at all, and some employees are like, when is the office back open? I need to get back in there to get some focused work done. And so you're just hearing it all. And so again, it's schools opening up is definitely going to be a key piece into our culture and our economy and our world to kind of get back to a state of normalcy. But we have to safety is the number one thing right now, and that's always the first thing that we have to be thinking about, whether when it comes to opening up schools or the office, or whatever. That's what's been kind of a silver lining about what's happening right now, is there's so much safety talk that should have been happening for so many years that we're forced to talk about now. So that's got to stay key. Instead, that has to stay number one when it comes to anything that we do and how we approach our decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to add real quick, I think you brought something up that I forgot to mention. With the redesign of buildings, a lot of people are talking about campuses now having more housing instead of other things. We're having to rethink the space that we already have in some situations. And some organizations might want to consider bringing daycares or things like that in that they hadn't before. On my campus, we have 2, I believe, but we could probably open a 3rd with the extra space that we might have having in a lecture hall or something weird. So I think a lot of organizations should consider how to be a little bit more holistic of an employer to take care of some of those concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like the role of the personal lives of employees has become magnified, not just because they're working at home, but just because of the domino effect that, discussing a pandemic and coronavirus, one thing leads to another. And so, schools might have to, or school systems collaborating with, making sure they're on the same page with most employers to ensure that there is that balance between, there's just the systemic issue of coronavirus. It's not just isolated to the office. And the more you think about it, the more, the more dominoes that you realize will be affected by this massive shift. So this is the final formal question, and I think this one specifically for Gabe. How do you manage risk and remote work at an organization where some employees are required to be physically present? So you mentioned you have employees that work in a warehouse. Here at the DLBA, we have the clean and safe team that have to be out in the environment, and we share a kitchen, we share a workspace. So how do you manage that, especially if employees that are physically present and rely on that work either feel unsafe being there or for some other reason?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it hasn't been easy. Let me start there. The very first move that we made when all this news started pouring in, February, early March, when things were really starting to accelerate, with coronavirus, is we got our HR team together and we created a COVID response team. What are we going to do? How are we going? We reevaluated. The next thing we did was reevaluate every single protocol and procedure that we had in place. What needs to change first and foremost, right? And from there, we laid out a plan to our employees, and we said, hey, the warehouse workers, here's your plan, and the office workers, we're going to be working remotely. We can't be in the office at all. It's 100% remote, and we had to make sure that our IT staff was ready for something like that. Make sure that everyone has a good working computer and a good internet connection, which is so ironic because that is what we do, right? For those folks who are being left on the wrong side of the digital divide. And then we had to come up with, the next step of, again, flexibility is stability. That's how we came up with that during that time of reflection with our COVID response team, and just making sure that we're able to accommodate everyone's needs, no matter what they are, and with safety at the forefront. For the warehouse workers who had to, they can't do the work remotely, that was the very first space that we really took a hard look at. And we created what we called cleaning hours, to where every hour, we stop what we're doing, you clean your space. We have a receptionist to where he cleans the break room. We make sure we have the right PPE equipment, gloves, masks, cleaning materials, and so on and so forth. We created we use Slack at Human IT, so we created a special Slack channel for anyone who felt like we weren't meeting proper safety guidelines, to meet the current challenge of the coronavirus. Let us know right away. And so we created a great communication channels, in my opinion, to make sure that we're listening to our employees and saying, where can we improve? How can we make sure that we can create a more comfortable and safer environment for you to be effective at your job? So that's been really useful. We have everyone, before you start working, you have to fill out a questionnaire or a survey. How are you feeling? Do you have a temperature? Is someone at home sick? So there's a few questions that they have to answer before you even start working in the first place.
Yeah.
Lunch, the lunchroom and the break rooms, those have new rules. I think Alan was speaking about that before too. Like the meeting rooms, you have to stay 6 feet apart. You have to practice social distancing. You can no longer sit right next to your buddy at lunch. You have to have 6 feet in between you. And so, we had to get creative with schedules and lunch schedules to make sure not everyone's taking lunch at the same time, which people were used to. So that was a challenge. And then, like I said, we had to accelerate and take a look at, expanding our square footage just so we can accommodate as many scenarios as we possibly could, whether you're trying to collaborate or you're not. Excuse me, that's my dog. Sign of the times, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot.
So investing, and we also invested in expanding our HR team. We hired two more generalists and another manager to help us keep up with all these rapidly changing demands and scenarios. So it's been a real tough challenge, and it's not just up to HR. It's been a tough challenge for HR. It's been a tough challenge for our IT team to make sure that the infrastructure is there and that we're meeting any IT tickets for not only the folks who are working from home, but any IT issues at the warehouse as well. So oftentimes when I hear these discussions about the future of office space, it's all protocols, procedures, in HR. I think IT teams often get overlooked in this equation. And I feel like, for them, it's okay, you have a plan, everyone work remote, and then you take a look at your IT manager and like, well, I can't make that happen for another month. And so they need to take a look at their priorities and their procedures about what it is that they're going to get done and what needs to now take a back seat because of coronavirus. And we need to support our staff completely differently than we were when we were all in one location or under the same roof. So I know that's a long answer, but there's a ton of different things that we're doing.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, physical versus digital infrastructure. And that kind of, your work, Dr. Warren, in terms of creating assessment methodology for some organizations, I could see that in the future, creating a new framework for how efficient or successful an office or an organization is in terms of following these rules or ensuring that the workplace is still a safe environment where everyone feels comfortable.
Well, I think so many organizations have huge safety concerns. I was looking that up with a lot of the other recent stuff going on of what are the most dangerous jobs actually out there. And a lot of them have very well adapted training manuals, safety rules, regulations, training aids hanging around the organizations about wear your hard hat or your goggles or whatever. I think that's going to be embedded a little bit more, hopefully, in organizations, and hopefully some of my students and graduates will be creating those training programs to get people to be safer in the organizations, because a lot of us will be back at our jobs. I'm guessing 50% will probably be that sort of like settling point where about 50% of our work is done virtual, 50% at home on average, even within person. But when you are at the office, I think there will be mandated sort of safety precautions or signs, just like wash your hands, but maybe a little bit more intense than that.
Yes, like a construction site, but for an office space is kind of what I'm envisioning in terms of just amount of wording and warnings everywhere. Yeah, Alan, if you have anything else to add, we're kind of tight on time, so I'll let you wrap it up if you have any final comments.
No final comments. I do want to say just one thing. I did read yesterday that I believe the Ford Motor Company is back to full production without any COVID incidents whatsoever. So, you know, somebody has figured out how to get back into an auto assembly factory and make that safe. So if they can make that safe, I think we can make warehouses safe. We can make office spaces safe.
Yeah, just takes the effort and a lot more thinking than when Gabe laid it out. It's so much backwards thinking to you know, taking steps back. It doesn't seem like it would require as much mental capacity to rethink an office space in this context, but it really does. There's just so many variables to consider. But yeah, we're out of time now, but I want to thank you guys so much for joining us, Dr. Warren and Gabe and Alan. This has been, obviously, it's an evolving conversation. There's not really a clear answer, but I think having a conversation like this with the three of you together from different industries and different backgrounds really kind of highlights the changes that are going on, and as well as, you know, the massive amount of effort that's going to be required to adapt to this. And we'll see, you know, at the end of the summer going into the fall, a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about starting to take shape. So it's really enlightening, and hopefully for the participants as well, this kind of generates some ideas into your own office space, something to bring to your boss or your HR rep. And so, yeah, I really want to thank you guys for being a part of this and lending us your time and your expertise.
Great. Thank you, Mo. Oh, Mo, were there any questions from the audience?
I don't see. Oh man, my Zoom is frozen.
Willetta,
I have not seen any.
Looks like there may be one.
I've not.
Yeah, Mo, there is one question from Willetta.
Okay, I'll read this. Yes, regarding flexibility, fluctuation of people within an office be dependent on most recent data about local COVID spikes, and should workers within the office be prepared to work from home if there's like a spike in cases? So are you guys going to be using, you know, like the LB dashboard for coronavirus to influence your decision making?
Yes.
Yep, most definitely. Safety number one, right? As of today, you know, our offices remain closed. We're just trying to prepare for, you know, when, which is, there's no clear answer for this as well. You know, so we have an HR committee and we have a directors committee, and it has to pass both committees in order for us to say, okay, we're going to open up our office again and make it an option to be able to come into the office. As right now, in the way things are going today, there is no option to come back into that office, and we're going to do everything that we can to support the folks who have to work from home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kind of responding on the fly if there's data-driven approach, especially now, in the digital age. There's another question about contact information for you guys. If you're comfortable with your email address, I can send that out to the participants after this. But yeah, we're right at the end for time, but yeah, thank you guys so much for participating. The DLBA is planning on doing another webinar series later in the summer and the fall. And we want to take a focus more on a lot of the social equity issues that are facing our downtown, both from coronavirus. Digital access is a big one. The role of public space, as you guys mentioned, expanding that both with retail and restaurants as well, open streets. So there's pretty much endless possibilities of what we can talk about, and we're really excited and having further conversations, roping in some of my other coworkers as well to facilitate those. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for participating, so much for attending, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend, safe weekend as well.
Well, thank you. It was great meeting Chris and Gabe.
Nice meeting you too, Alan and Gabe.
Take care.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.